Next up are some measures related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. The graph at the bottom of the slide shows that the city has gotten more diverse over the past 10 years. Although diversity hasn't increased much in the past 5 years. The bar chart at the top shows income distribution. And it shows generally that the rich are getting a little richer and the poor are getting a little poorer. It shows that the wealthiest 20% are making more than 50% of the money, and the poorest 20% are making about 3%. And these are pretty similar statistics to other cities, our size, and larger cities. It's actually even a larger disparity. When you break this down again and get away from averages into race, you can see significant disparities with Black and Native American households on average making about half of what white households earn. Important in this is, one, is just stunning, and it again shows the importance of taking general average and median income, household income, and breaking them down into other categories. We could also have categories related to women-headed households and other areas. Along that line, we looked at income's only half of the equation, and the cost of living is really the other half. So this graph shows that since 2008, the price of housing and other expenses have caused a decrease in the percentage of households who are self-sufficient. And that means they're able to pay their bills for transportation, housing, food, clothing, and such, from 77% down to 71%. And so that means that there are more people in Multnomah County who are relying on friends and family. They may be living with friends and family. They may be having family doing childcare instead of being able to pay for that, or just not having sufficient enough to eat or a sufficient place to live. So that's been an increase. If I were to ask you why, I think you would all say it's housing. And what we did was we broke out where those things have really shifted in the past 5 years. And this is, again, it's something called the Self-Sufficiency Index. It combines the cost of childcare, taxes, transportation, housing, healthcare, and food. This example here shows households, basically our most, the household that's kind of having the toughest time, which would be a single parent that has an infant and a preschool child. You can see the income is that little blue bar there. It's only gone up 2% from 2008 to 2014, but childcare, taxes, transportation, and housing have gone up much more. We don't have final numbers for 2015-16 yet, but housing will probably, that bar will go up, I think, significantly more. But I think as much as it may go up, it's not going to go up as much as childcare costs has gone up. So we definitely have a childcare crisis as much as a housing crisis. And from my perspective, the reason you don't hear about it as much is that it just doesn't affect as many households. So less than 25% of our households have children 18 and younger. So when you think about how many households actually have just a preschooler and younger, or two of those, it's down in the 1-2% of total households, and those households are mostly led by women. And so there's just the voice, the discussion, having it be an important issue is that it's affecting a smaller number of people. Did you have a question, Katie?
I was just thinking it would be good to see that graph, and in terms of its impact, because housing, 9% rise in housing, if housing is $1,500 a month,
right,
is going to be a lot more than even if childcare. I mean, that's got to be bad. So it would be interesting to see how the impact on the household.
Sure, and we could pull those numbers up for you. I do know that the child care costs, especially for infant care, it is the main reason why women, when they have a second child, can't go back to work. It's not housing costs. Both of you.
Susan, am I reading this correctly, that over the 6-year period, taxes have gone up 61%.
So that's the question I immediately asked Nick also, and
It
he
doesn't
explained
make
quite.
sense intuitively.
No, it doesn't make sense intuitively at first until you understand it, which is if you were to actually earn enough money to pay for all of these things, what happens is that you actually end up in a higher tax bracket. And there is a real negative. So, when you're at a very low income, your taxes are very low and you actually get all sorts of tax credits. And there's a real sort of disincentive. You get to a certain income to actually pay all your bills and your taxes go up more than proportionally. And so there's sort of this game of and a sad one, that people play of like, okay, I finally made enough money to pay all my bills and now my taxes went up. So that's why that number is so much higher.
State legislation, there's state legislation to address childcare costs, particularly to offer childcare reimbursements or subsidies through employers, because Oregon has one of the worst childcare burdens in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So call your legislator.
It is funny, too, that we don't think, at least not in America, of childcare as being an issue that government should be involved in. But if you go to Europe, there's like the Department of Childcare. This is just like, of course, we have a Department of Housing and Transportation and Childcare because these are things that people need. So it is interesting. And obviously, the single mom with 3 kids here does tend to focus on this occasionally. Yeah, we can. I don't know if we can do that or not, but I'll look. That'd be great. Again, it's one of those things where if you just look at income and don't look at the expense side of the ledger, it tells a very different story. And you will hear people saying that Portland is doing so well, incomes are up, and and then you start breaking it down and you find out that, yeah, for some people, this place is booming and it's working really well, and for others, it's not. And that's sort of what this is telling us. So that's it. Only 12. It was long enough, but it does give you some indication of how we're doing. We have lots of other indicators that we follow. We do some joint work with Portland State University and following different indicators. I think it's really good for us to be grounded in data sometimes. We all are telling stories all the time about what we think is truth, and so I'm going to try and come back every year and sort of ground us back. We've seen some real major improvements in education, job growth, environmental issues in some areas. We've seen the ability to continue or to grow a little bit in terms of the number of people getting to live in healthy, connected neighborhoods. But we have a serious affordability issue around housing and childcare costs, and continuing that households of color are just not faring as well as others.